The following presentation is a production of Ride the Wave Media.
We are back. We are those guys. We hope to be your guys as we are sprinting on our way to the NFL draft. Nick Ferguson with me as always. We are excited to hopefully remove some of the smoke around the smoke screens here because there are a handful of teams that we have no idea what they're going to do just a week out. What's going on, Nick Ferguson?
Nothing much, man. I love this time of year because the anticipation is swelling as fans wait every waking day trying to figure out what the hell will their team do to make them so much better than the previous year. And we know that first round of the draft never really goes the way that everyone anticipated. So I'm anticipating myself that it's going to be a lot of fireworks and leave a lot of people scratching their heads.
Well, you are undefeated in the offseason. So if you're picking third overall like my Patriots or 12th overall like your Denver Broncos, you know, the sky's the limit. There are no wrong decisions. You only have to reap what you sow a year or 2 years from now if a particular draft pick doesn't work out, or like clockwork, there's a receiver the Patriots pass on that becomes an all-pro. We're going to get to some thoughts on the NFL draft, but I think it was important for us to start with some of the news around the National Football League. Two big contract extensions at premier positions, more or less resetting the market. And we'll go with the more recent one. Earlier this week, the Philadelphia Eagles were signing Devontae Smith with an additional 3 years, $75 million, which will kick in after he plays on his $15.59 million fifth-year option. And the Philadelphia Eagles, you know, for many teams that don't want to, you know, incentivize paying three players a ton of money, they're doing exactly that with the core of Jalen Hurts, A.J. Brown, and now Devontae Smith. Nick, how do you like this Eagles roster with a lot of key pieces locked up long-term?
You know what? I like it. And here's the reason I like it. I mean, they put a significant amount of money in the quarterback position when you talk about, you know, Jalen Hurts. And for me, this is the model, or what should be the model of the NFL. When you grab your quarterback, regardless of what people may say they can't do, you find out what they can do, taking the page out of the Patriots way. I know you don't like that part about it, but
yeah,
you build around that guy. So you have your receivers around Jalen Hurts, so now he can grow with him. Now we saw the Eagles take a step back because they lost both of their coordinators after their Super Bowl run against Kansas City. But this is kind of what you do. And here's the great thing, you know, for, you know, what's going on with Philly and Harvey Roseman and what they're doing is when you look at the defensive side of the ball, they are really talented. They experienced a lot of injuries last year, which derailed their championship hopes. But they have a lot of rookie guys who are on rookie deals defensively. And that's the total opposite of what we're seeing a lot of teams attempt or will attempt in this upcoming draft, because the idea is if you have a rookie quarterback, then you can go fill out your team defensively and offensively with higher priced guys. But Philly said, no, we're young defensively. We're just going to make our offense that much better because we know we have to compete against just the guys in the NFC, right? And Jordan Love and what they're doing in Green Bay. But you have a loaded AFC that you have to compete against, and it's about scoring points, but it's about defense as well.
The Philadelphia Eagles, of course, coming off that Super Bowl loss, 10-1 to start the season. They finished 1-6 with one of the least inefficient defenses in terms of allowing big plays, and their secondary got banged up. Kevin Byard, the acquisition from Tennessee at the trade deadline, didn't have quite the impact that they were hoping for. And so it's putting a lot of pressure on those young guys to kind of step up. And, you know, guys we saw win national championships at Georgia, it's time for Keely Ringo in the secondary, or Nolan Smith they took at the end of the first round last year, to really find a role on that defense, knowing that they've made some additions on both sides of the ball defensively, sending Hassan Reddick to the Jets after picking up Bryce Huff from them in free agency. But you're talking about stretching the almighty dollar, because this was a tweet that we had read from the Ringer's Benjamin Solak, who is an Eagles fan himself. Following the extension, the Eagles, by average annual value, have the fourth highest paid quarterback in Jalen Hurts, the fourth highest paid running back in Saquon Barkley, which, hello, the fourth and fifth highest paid wide receivers in A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith. Smith, as you know, is important to note, his new contract average falls right around in the top five, the edge of the top five. The fifth highest paid tight end in Dallas Goedert, the fourth and the fifth highest paid tackles in Lane Johnson. And, oh gosh, now it's going to escape me. Of course it is. I was on such a roll here with the Eagles. And the highest paid guard as well. So it's a lot of emphasis on the offensive side of the football. Is that leveraging too much on the defensive side? Do they just need to, in true Howie Roseman fashion, just load up on edge and just hope for the best with the rest of that defense?
Well, that's what you can do because, look, you have to fix one side of the ball, and you have to start by having somewhat of a game plan. And I like to think that in Philadelphia, they have a vision, and they're just trying to carry that vision forward. I know we've seen every offseason, when the competition committee gets together, they're changing rules, not to benefit the defense, but to help out the offense. So if the Eagles understand this, it's like, look, let's load up on this side of the ball because we're going to have to outscore people. We know our defense, we're hoping to come along, but they may have their struggles from time to time. So if you go out and you get some young edge rushers, some young linebackers, once again, you're keeping that margin of money that you deal out on one side of the ball down while you increase the efforts on the other side. So I like what Philly is doing. And it's proven that, that they have the talent to get them where they needed to, but they just were not able to get over the hump. And I would say in that Super Bowl against Kansas City, I would say there's an added element that the Philadelphia Eagles were fighting against, and it was that horrible field at the Cardinal Stadium.
Well, both teams played on the same field. Their style of football, I guess, is better suited with better grass. I'm interested, we can go on and on about the Eagles offense. My take that you've probably heard me say here already, and I'll continue to say here on those guys, is that the tush push was a Jason Kelce play, not a Jalen Hurts play. So his absence from a leadership standpoint, and certainly when they've got third and short, completely changes the scope of that offense. So the addition of Saquon Barkley is a good one. And this offense looks primed to be one of the best in the NFC. But, all we can do is look at the decisions that they've made and note the timing. And we look around the rest of the league. You stay right there in that division and not, hours after the extension was done for Devontae Smith, CeeDee Lamb, Cowboys star wide receiver who's sitting there on that fifth-year option, is not showing up for minicamp. And you've got other receivers from an incredible 2021 draft class that includes Jamar Chase, Amon-Ra St. Brown, other guys from the previous year, including Brandon Ayuk and T. Higgins, who's on the franchise tag. I mean, the Eagles got out and got this extension done before all of these other receivers were done. And I'm wondering who, I don't want to say the biggest loser is, but who has the most pressure on them to get a deal done and keep their guys in check. It's a big ask, but I think you have to start with CeeDee Lamb, considering he's the one who's playing on the fifth-year option, or to this point, not playing at all on it.
Well, yeah, you look at CeeDee Lamb, and it's just funny how the scales kind of tipped in one favor one quarterback and against another. When we look at what happened to Josh Allen and not having Stephon Diggs, I mean, some people are making light of that and saying it's not going to be a huge deal. That's going to be a problem for Josh Allen. So if you're a quarterback, you need weapons to help matriculate the ball down the field. We know Dak Prescott is taking a lot of criticism over the years, and CeeDee Lamb has emerged as his number one wide receiver. So with the
threat, and he was one of the best in the league last year.
Absolutely. With the idea that CeeDee Lamb is threatening to hold out, Jerry Jones is going to have to make a decision, because when you look at Dak's contract, both he and Mike McCarthy are kind of tied together. They don't have extensions. They're playing on the final years and coaching on the final years of their deal. And if you're Dak Prescott, whether you want to stay with the Cowboys and move on to another team, you need an ideal guy. You don't have Michael Gallup anymore. He's not there. Dalton Schultz is not there anymore. And Ezekiel Elliott, he may come back to the Cowboys. We have to wait to see. So some of your weapons have departed by their way of leaving or the team pushing them out. So once soon as Devontae had that deal, and God, players talk. Let me tell you, guys talk, and they should talk and say, look, I can help you increase your deal, right? And the way that I'll do it, I'll reset the market and force your team to now have to move up to match that type of money. And you can't tell me Jerry Jones is going to be that stubborn to say, you know what?
Well,
Yeah. You know what? Let me back up for a second. He is that stubborn. But how stupid will that actually be? That's not smart. So you let CeeDee Lamb sit out there, and I'm going to just put you in the mind of one Jerry Jones. He's probably thinking, okay, yeah, CD did well. You go out and find another CD who was younger, and we don't have to pay that money. But the problem with that issue is you're not going to get that same level of production for your quarterback. So Dallas is in somewhat of a conundrum. They need CeeDee Lamb for both McCarthy and Dak Prescott to perform well.
it's just too much of an ask. And as much as we talk about player empowerment and everything, you need a certain type of owner that is willing to spend the cash. And clearly, with the prices I read for that Eagles offense, Jeffrey Lurie was more than happy to pay cash for a competitive team that's competing in Super Bowls. Jerry Jones just hasn't done that. That's why we could see both Dak Prescott and CeeDee Lamb go in free agency. And they're as top heavy as any roster in the NFL. Watching Dan Quinn go become the Commanders head coach and grabbing all their depth pieces on the defensive line and their center Tyler Biadasz, they're not better than they were a year ago. And that was 12 wins in the regular season and 0 playoff wins. So it'll be interesting to see the two stars left on that offense. You've got Brandon Cooks there. Jake Ferguson stepped in nicely to take over for Dalton Schultz, but fine. But they really need to get Dak and CD to stay long term. Otherwise, we're looking at a full rebuild, which, just Google how old Jerry Jones is. I don't think he has enough patience or life left, frankly, to withstand another rebuild. That's just, I think T. Higgins and Brandon Ayuk are the ones to watch. We noted that there was a contract extension for Josh Allen of the Jaguars. T. Higgins is one of the last guys left on the tag still, and the Bengals just don't seem to be making the same commitment that the Eagles are in paying a quarterback and 2 top receivers. I'm wondering if one of T. Higgins or Brandon Ayuk would be the first to move of the group I listed, compared to the CDs and Justin Jefferson's Amon-Ra players.
I was reading something, and I think that even though T. Higgins doesn't like the situation that he's in financially, but there may be a situation that presents itself where Alex, he decides to stay and kind of play this thing out, because here's what players have to think about, is that you may be in pursuit of riches, and I get it based on the level of performance in that prior year, but you could go to another team and your numbers are not the same. You're not as involved. And it takes me back to when Greg Jennings was a member of the Green Bay Packers. He left the Packers to stay within the division and go to the Minnesota Vikings because the offense didn't sit around what he could do. His numbers kind of fell off, and then therefore his career as well. So players have to really be really strategic about what they're thinking. Are you going to the team and you're going to be a number 1, or are you going to be a number 2? And also, too, if you remain with the team that you're with, because you're going through a contract negotiation, will they try to accentuate your abilities, because they know the more touches you receive, the more receptions in this case, the more productive you're going to be, and that's going to price you out. So there's so many dynamics that go into making a decision if you're a player on the team, whether you decide to stay with the team or you decide to keep a player. But the one thing I do know, you have to remain competitive within your division if you want to talk about playoffs at all.
We can go on and on about these receivers. It's incredibly exciting to see players on the move. And we're going to get just that a week from now with the NFL draft set in Detroit. The Lions, all of a sudden, the darlings of the NFL. Not a ton of questions about them from the jump. But Nick, looking at just about a week out, there are a handful of teams I think we both kind of agree on. We have a ton of questions and really have no clue what they're doing once it becomes their turn, not just to pick in the first round, but all 7 rounds of this draft. And I wanted to start with, let's see, I think we both have 2 teams we're going to bring to the table. We talked about it ahead of time, so no agreements in terms of we're going to be in sync totally. But I think this conversation for me started with the Josh Allen extension for the Jacksonville Jaguars because it had taken them so long to iron out the terms of the 5-year, $150 million extension to get him off that tag after he had a career high and franchise record 17 and a half sacks. The Jaguars made it a point of emphasis to bring back some of their guys on the defensive line, and they also invested high draft capital, Trayvon Walker, from former first-round overall pick. And you look at some of the free agent moves that they made. Eric Armstead is now in the interior of that defensive line. And then a lot of the additions they made were on the offense with Gabe Davis at wide receiver, Mitch Morse at center, and then beefing up the secondary with Darnell Savage coming from Green Bay. I mentioned the free agency moves. I mentioned the extension done for Josh Allen because looking at all of those pieces, I still have no idea what the Jacksonville Jaguars are looking to do, not just with the 17th overall selection, but because Trent Baalke is a guy historically who we really aren't sure of what it is he's looking to accomplish. He's identified his guys. They tend to lead free agency and pay a ton of money for players at particular positions. And I'm also of the belief that they were fully convinced that they were going to get Calvin Ridley back. They wanted to let him go into free agency. It was a risk that they made so that their trade with Atlanta, they would send a 3rd-round pick instead of a 2nd. So you play cute games, or you play stupid games, you get stupid prizes, Nick. I don't know how else to put it, but I'm not really sure what they do 17th overall because they're very top heavy. And if they wanted Calvin Ridley and still didn't get him, they could just go take another receiver too, despite all the money they gave to Gabe Davis and Christian Kirk and Evan Ingram in years past.
Well, for me, letting Kevin Ridley go, that was a huge mistake. And that was a gamble. Trent Baalke, I believe that he is going to regret making because now you allow a receiver who was in your organization to stay within the division, and now you're going to see him twice a year, and you're going to see him with Newt Hopkins opposite him and Tony Pollard, the running back position, and an inspired Will Levis. So I don't know if that was the best decision to make. And Gabe Davis isn't going to, in my opinion, give you that same level of production. So for that team, for the Jacksonville Jaguars, I'm a little shocked at some of the things they did in the offseason. Now, the one thing to their credit they say they can do is there are going to be options in this upcoming draft with wide receiver prospects that you don't have to pour a hefty amount of money into. But once again, looking at Philadelphia, finding young talent that's on rookie contracts to build around your quarterback is key. Now, I guess maybe it's just me, but I would have loved to see a Clemson quarterback link up with another Clemson wide receiver in T. Higgins. But I'm guessing Doug Peterson and Trent Baalke said, once again, why give up draft capital? Why give a guy more money when we can go in the draft and get talented wide receivers on rookie deals? But it's going to be really interesting to see what they do down in Jacksonville, especially knowing what the Houston Texans did last year in the regular season and what they did so far in the offseason as well.
Well, very quickly, the Jacksonville Jaguars with Trevor Lawrence, they were expected to be the team, right? They had the can't miss prospect, and he was coming into his own. They had that comeback playoff win against the Chargers, and then all of a sudden, like the Houston Texans completely stole their thunder and are now the betting favorites to win the AFC South. The interesting thing when you come to the draft is that you look at some of the team needs that they had, whether it's corner, receiver, defensive tackle, edge. Those were the positions I just mentioned that they made additions in free agency. So they spent a ton of money, and yet there's still positions of need. So kind of looking at the board and 17th overall, I'm kind of curious, if it's a tackle receiver class early in that first round, if a lot of those guys go early and they may get a premier defensive player to them to fall to 17. But you almost kind of wonder if they need to move up if it comes to trying to leapfrog teams like New Orleans or Denver, or even getting into the top 10 if they want their pick of the litter at tackle or one of those, I don't know, maybe those top 3 receivers. Maybe Bulky was dead set on finding another receiver, and Calvin Ridley's not there. So what do you think the board kind of looks like, and where Jacksonville kind of gets the best opportunity to improve their roster?
For me, it's stay where you are. I mean, because someone is going to want to come up to where you are, and you're going to be able to add more draft capital because, I mean, you don't have to reach for a quarterback. You already have that guy.
Right. But I mean, the tackles, and if you want one of those 3 receivers, maybe.
Well, once again, you don't have to do that. It's called to reach for a reason. You're reaching for something, knowing as though there's some other things waiting behind those particular players that you can pick up on, because when you look at football offensive, right? More teams are running 11 personnel. You need to make sure that you have guys who are great route runners who can block in the running game. So there are going to be multiple options out there. I mean, Rome Odunze, everyone's talking about him, and Neighbors, right? Those are the guys that everyone wants. Was it great if the guy falls to you? Absolutely. But don't go up there trying to reach for that guy when you know, just like you said, they need to get better at the tackle position. They need to get better in the secondary defensively in Jacksonville. So just wait. And if you having issues in the secondary, the one way that you can kind of help those guys out is edge rush, right? So if you're sitting at 17, I think that's where Jacksonville lives, and you're looking to see how things kind of work out, maybe you go edge rusher. Could it happen that, let's just say, Brock Bowers from the University of Georgia somehow is still on the board? Could you imagine Brock Bowers with Evan Ingram at the tight end position for Trevor Lawrence? That's a nightmare.
Yeah, Bowers is such an interesting one because I think anywhere between 10 to 25, you just put him on any team because he's listed as a tight end, but he's really just a get open and get it type of guy. He gets plays, at the University of Georgia, he gets plays schemed for him to get open, and he's, designed to get the football, which is unlike most tight ends. And you see, some draft experts evaluate him closer to a type of Kyle Pitts player when he was coming out of Florida, who was a 4th overall selection. But yes, I think if you're in the teens and you're in need of defensive help, you can see the corners like Terrion Arnold or Kool-Aid McKinstry out of Alabama, Quinion Mitchell from Toledo, who I've read some view him as the greatest MAC player of all time. Sorry, Randy Moss. Sorry, Ben Roethlisberger. Quinion Mitchell is exciting. And then the edges you talk about, maybe Jared Verse or Leatu Latu, could be, the guys that end up for Jacksonville at 17 if they stay put. And if there's a run on offensive guys or 5 quarterbacks in the first round, they could trade down and still get the guy they want at the end of the first. Nick, you have a team for us, I believe, that definitely needs receiver help based on something we talked about in our last pod. So what's your team, Nick, that we still have no clue what they're going to do in this NFL draft?
Well, for me, it's the Giants, man. I mean, you bring on Drew Lock from Seattle.
I got Drew Lock takes.
Okay.
I'll let you finish, but.
And Brian Daboll is being labeled as a quarterback whisperer for what he was able to do with Josh Allen out of Buffalo, but he hasn't been able to duplicate that in the Giants uniform. And Daniel Jones is coming off of injury. And once again, the best offensive weapon that Daniel Jones had, or even the Giants had, is no longer on your squad. He's on your opposition, and that's Saquon Barkley. So they need to get help from a quarterback standpoint. They need offensive line help. They need help at the tight end position, wide receiver, offensive line, you name it. And you had to figure that Joe Shane and Brian Daboll, look, man, they're under the gun. Now, maybe if they were in Cleveland, it wouldn't be so bad. But they're in the Big Apple, where everything is measured under a microscope, and you always want to be better than the Jets in anything that you do. That's kind of the mindset of the G-Men. So that is a team that is, I would say, under a lot of pressure, both coach and GM.
So they sit 6th overall. And what I love about the Giants is they lose Daniel Jones, and everybody goes crazy because Tommy DeVito wins a
Uh,
couple of games while staying at his parents' house. And, they had 4 wins last year, New England, Arizona, and then twice against Washington. Well, those are 3 of the 5 teams picking ahead of them that also need quarterback. So you reap what you
yes.
sow. You have a great time watching a guy that shouldn't be an NFL quarterback win games, and now all of a sudden you're going to watch 3 guys go right ahead of you. And is this where JJ McCarthy starts? Do they even have to move up so that they swap with Arizona to ensure they get a JJ McCarthy? It's interesting because they have a ton of team needs, and quarterbacks certainly headlines that list. Quarterback, running back, after losing Saquon, like you said, outside of Andrew Thomas, they don't have a tackle. Evan Neal, when he's not getting in fights with Giants fans, is playing poorly. They also need help on the defensive side, corner, safety, tackle. So there's just a ton of team needs. So for them to have 3 quarterbacks on the roster in Daniel Jones, Tommy DeVito, and Drew Lock, a project type of pick, and I say project just because he didn't throw a ton, he's really young, and JJ McCarthy seems like something they don't need. However, we know that Daniel Jones isn't the future there, and the other 2 guys are on short-term deals. So they kind of need to chip away at this quarterback problem so we don't come back a year from now and they still have the same questions. Now, are you ready for my Drew Lock take?
Yeah, go right. Give it to me.
Well, John Schneider put it out for us. He accidentally let it slip that Drew Lock is going to be playing games for this Giants team. What do we know about, let's see. What I know that Nick Ferguson, is that Russell Wilson last year was asked to be benched because Sean Payton was afraid of having a fully guaranteed injury clause kicked in should Russell Wilson play and miss games, even with a competitive team. Now, I also know that Russell Wilson does not get injured, plays through injury, and was frankly upset by the decision, and likely so. Daniel Jones has a $23 million injury guarantee if he gets hurt playing next year. What's the difference between Daniel Jones and Russell Wilson? 2 neck injuries and a torn ACL. Drew Lock is coming in game 6, game 7. I mean, we're going to find out pretty quickly what this Giants team has. And John Schneider said that, Drew Lock signed with the Giants because he was told he'd have an opportunity to play, and he's going to play. The Giants can eat about $20 million in dead money if they let Daniel Jones go after next year, but his injury is fully guaranteed. His money becomes fully guaranteed with injury. So they have to be able to move on quickly. And Drew Lock is going to be playing too many games for them to not think about taking a quarterback. That said, with the 6th overall pick, you could have your pick of the litter with tackle. You could have one, or you could pick 2 of the 3 top wide receivers, I would suspect, and you can build a core around a quarterback who, has yet to be named. And you can ride the ship with Drew Lock, who maybe you can talk about at length, can win them a few games. And they kind of just go from there. So I'm curious, Nick, when you don't really have an answer at quarterback, but you're paying a guy like he is your priority to insulate him with tackle help, which could also pave the way for tackle or receiver help, which could pave the way for the next guy that comes in, whether that's JJ McCarthy at 6th overall this year or somebody in the next year or 2.
See, I'm a fan of moving back because everything that you're saying is going to entice everyone below the Giants who want to move up. And if you add JJ McCarthy or Drake May or any of those quarterbacks to that mix, so now you apparently have 4 quarterbacks on your
the roster.
And
Yeah.
you say, well, did we actually get better? And the answer to that question is no. And you're absolutely right. I told people here in Denver that when Drew Lock signed with the Giants, it was with the idea that they are going to give him an opportunity to compete. And I go back to last year's game against Philadelphia Eagles, and say whatever you want to say about the Eagles, but in the primetime game, Drew Lock actually showed up. and you say, okay, well, look at his development under Shane Waldron. It was so much better than what the Broncos gave him at the time as far as his development. And all he had to do is let Rich Scangarello do his job and develop Drew Lock over the next 2-3 years, and the Broncos would be in the situation they're in. But this is a great moment for Drew Lock, for him to prove that, hey, listen, I wasn't taken in the first round. I thought I was first round worthy, but now I get a second shot. And you get a chance to do it, not in Denver, not in Seattle, but in the Big Apple, where if you win ball games, man, they love you. Seattle is diehard. Denver is diehard. Pittsburgh is diehard. But it's something about the New York fan base. They're going to love you or they're going to hate you. And if I am Joe Shane or Brian Dable, I'm looking at this and saying, okay, well, Daniel Jones has been injured a lot. We can move away from him and we'll just have to eat that cash. But for right now, Drew Lock might be our true bridge quarterback. So let's put players around him and let's see what it looks like. Because if it doesn't look well, guess what? There's another draft in 25 and 26. But for right now, you got to be competitive within your division, because I can tell you this, New York fans cannot and will not tolerate losing. And that would be the quickest way for the exit of Joe Shea and Brian Dable. So they better look at this upcoming draft with open eyes and build around Drew Lock, as crazy as that might sound.
I'm just sort of curious. We'll get to our next team shortly here, Nick. But other than Chicago and Washington, how many teams in the top 10 do you think should trade down? Just from a pure, your philosophy, Nick. Just New England, Arizona, the LA Chargers, the New York Giants, the Tennessee Titans, the Falcons, the Bears, 9th overall pick, and the Jets. Do you think they should just all trade down? That's kind of what I'm getting from you.
Well, not all teams. It all depends on where you think you are from a quarterback standpoint. If you think that you're great, right now for the quarterback standpoint, you have a competent guy, you can compete, then why not move back, around them? Now, if you say that there's an extraordinary right tackle or left tackle that's in the draft that you just can't pass up, then you take that guy. But I know this from over a decade of playing in this league and playing against some elite teams and coaches, that it is just that. You need a bona fide team. No one player, no tackle, no running back, no corner, no safety, no quarterback ever wins games by themselves. It's a collective. And if you just fixate on one particular position, you're going to find yourself the following year fixated on the same position again.
I'm sort of fixated 5, 6, and 7, the Chargers, the Giants, the Titans. I could see all three of them taking tackles. More than anything, Brian Callahan, the new head coach for the Tennessee Titans, they're at 7. I think the safest pick, the reason why the Titans would never be mentioned in this episode of teams, we have no clue what they're going to do. Brian Callahan comes in. His dad, the great Bob Callahan, longtime offensive line coach. I mean, what is that dynamic where it's like, Dad, I know we need offensive tackle help, and you're my father, but I know better than you do. Titans are taking the tackle at 7. So it's up to the Giants if they have a preference of somebody. If tackle is the answer, they probably need to stay put as opposed to trading down. The next team I want to bring up, when we talked about the receiver discussion earlier, in the previous episode as well, it was Stephon Diggs on the move. So now the Buffalo Bills sitting 28th overall. It's not just receiver with Gabe Davis, we mentioned in Jacksonville, and Stephon Diggs now in Houston, but they have other positions that have just been completely gutted. Corner, safety, their tried and true duo of Micah Hyde and Jordan Poyer no longer together. Ronald Darby going to Jacksonville. Tre'Davious White, while rehabbing, is still a free agent. I kind of suspect he'll come back, but they just have so many needs on both sides of the football that, you get to the 28th overall selection and, well, I'm not sure if they stay there and there's a receiver they like, but they lost their top 2 guys on the depth chart. And I know Curtis Samuel comes in from Washington, but you can't just say that Curtis Samuel is now a wide receiver 1. I've seen him in Carolina. I've seen him in Washington. He is exactly who he should be, and he's going to occupy the slot. but they need a true outside receiver to pair with Samuel and Khalil Shakir in that offense, where otherwise you've got practice squad players in the receiving core for the Buffalo Bills.
This is one of those cases where, as I said previously, teams are moving down. This is a team, and Brandon Beane and Sean McDermott, that want to move up, right?
Okay.
All the
Yeah.
arrows are pointing up because you have Josh Allen, and you always wonder, what is that window like, right? How far, and just think about how far that Josh Allen and the Bills have been able to get, but still fall short of the goal. But like you said, there's no Micah Hyde. There's no Jordan Poyer. There's no Stephon Diggs, right? These are people who were key personnel members to getting the Bills to where they were as being a competitive team. So right now, it's the worst word you want to use in sport is a rebuild. That's what's happening. They have to rebuild the fort around Josh Allen. Yeah, you have Cook, as a running back. So that's great. So now you're talking about, well, how do we get better? You got to get better from a defensive standpoint. They brought in, I think it was, who was it? Von Miller. I'm sorry. Drew
Well, that was, talk about forgettable. That was a huge, edge is another need of theirs because they were never able to hit on their big free agent swing in Von Miller.
Right. So since Von Miller had to kind of restructure his contract because obviously he's not the same player, but they brought him in to wreak havoc on opposing offenses and quarterbacks. So for me, you want to move up to get an interior guy. Either you're getting someone on the offensive line to protect Josh Allen, or you're getting someone or one of like maybe two guys defensively, edge rushers, to kind of help you out, especially in the cold weather. So that is something that the Bills definitely need to pay attention to. And that's one of those teams that they need to move up because right now their potential to win a Super Bowl is starting to trend downward.
Well, they lost to Kansas City 3 out of the last 4 years in the playoffs. And as of today, again, they have plenty to do, 28th overall and then some. They're not any better than they were those previous seasons. Nick, you've got one more team for us that a week out from the NFL draft, I have no clue what they're doing.
Yeah, man. And it would be the Denver Broncos, man, because the reason I say that, and I know it may sound crazy because the idea is that, well, you don't have Russell. You have Ben DiNucci and you have Jarrett Stidham as your quarterback. So the obvious answer is quarterback. But I say, well, if you go out and get that guy, are you standing pat at 12 or you're trying to move up? And if you are, what do you have to give up to acquire that guy? Once again, this is one of those situations that I would encourage the Broncos to move back because they have a first-round pick, no second-round pick. They have two third-round picks. But by that time you get to the third round, all the talent that you need to improve your team isn't there anymore. And I can tell you right now, there is a lot of pressure on both George Payton and Sean Payton. Now, if you look around here in Denver, most would say it's on George Payton. Yeah, that's on George.
He outside looking in, he just kind of looks like a suit for me that does paperwork for Sean Payton, the head coach.
Well, it's a very interesting dynamic. I don't know this for sure, but it seems as though Sean Payton has more power than that of.
Oh, that doesn't. You know they do, Nick. They'll need a tap dance around it.
So it is a crazy dynamic. So that's why I shift the bulk of the pressure to George, but to Sean because he's building out this team and this organization to mimic that of what took place in New Orleans. But here's the only problem with that philosophy. See, that was in the NFC South where they didn't have that many good teams. And the battle was between Falcons and the Saints. Here in the AFC West, that's a whole different monster, right? You got the Raiders who beat the Broncos last year with Aiden O'Connell, right? And then you have Justin Herbert, who now has the head coach that the Broncos ownership has wanted for the past 2 years. He's now running things out there in LA with the Chargers. And oh, by the way, the reigning Super Bowl champs who won the Super Bowl, not by offensive standards, by defensive standards. So there's an immense amount of pressure on the Denver Broncos to get this right. My idea is if you feel as though there's a quarterback that you want, Go get him, but you better be right. Because if you're wrong, there's a number of people who are going to be fired. And this is not one of those things that you can just point the finger at George Payton and say, well, it's all George's fault. Can't do
Right.
that anymore.
Yeah. So I'm wondering that, of course, quarterback is going to be their top need. They need, they had a few departures in free agency, Josie Jewell and Brandon Jones. And certainly we mentioned Russell Wilson. Other than Josh Reynolds coming in to run dig routes in the place of Jerry Jeudy, who went to Cleveland.
Yeah.
There's a ton of needs that this team has at premier positions. So a best player available type of approach seems like it works. I'm curious though, sitting at 12, the Minnesota Vikings have been very transparent, both in Kevin O'Connell's press conferences and in their acquisition of Houston's 23rd overall pick. Somebody that either wants to come down from that top 10 is going to end up with the 23rd pick and the 11th pick, one spot ahead of the Denver Broncos. So really, when we talk about teams like the Giants, we did at length, and others, the thought of asking them to trade down, Nick, could come at the expense of them taking a player that you covet at 12. So again, you need to find a partner to trade up. But if they covet someone at 12 and he goes at 11, now here they go trading down again. We have it all figured out, even if these teams don't. He's Nick Ferguson. I'm Alex Hardy, and we are those guys. And this is Nick before we split. Nick, we have so many ideas about what teams should do versus what they will do, but it all comes at a huge risk. Nick, before we split, what's one of the biggest mistakes any of these teams can make as we approach the draft next week?
The mistake they can make is knowing as though there's a division rival sitting right behind you in front of you, and you make a decision based on that and not something that you actually need from a team standpoint. You look at your roster and you say, okay, what kind of holes that we can plug? Don't think about, okay, well, the Raiders are picking behind us. They may want to go get this guy. Who gives a crap about what they want to do? At the end of the day, it's what fits your team, right? And so many teams look at these mock drafts and make decisions based on that. Yeah, you want to look within your division and see what those teams are doing. But first, you have to look in-house first and plug the gaps that you have.
He's Nick Ferguson, 10 years in the NFL. You can find him on social at Nick Ferguson _25. Breaking down tape, any questions about his Broncos or any of your teams, he'll be thrilled to tell you about why Jarrett Stidham is good enough for the Broncos to pass on a quarterback in this draft. That and so much more. I'm Alex Hardy. We're those guys. We hope to be your guys. We have 2 more shows where we're going to be breaking down some topical NFL news, plus some questions we have coming up to the draft. And then we've got a big draft recap once it all shakes down in Detroit football. Hey, we'll catch you guys next time. Nick, what do you have to say to the people on our way out of here?
Hey, don't eat cotton candies because it's bad for your teeth.
That's it?
Yeah, that's it. Don't eat cotton candy.
Right. Ferguson, safety on the football field and for your oral hygiene. Peace.